Hi, I'm Anna, and welcome to the Sompo Deep Cut. When you first look at Canada on a map, the instinct is to think, how can wine possibly work here? But when you stand in the vineyards, whether on the shores of Lake Ontario or beside the long glacial lakes of the Okanagan, you realize that Canada's wine story is one of precision, survival, and astonishing clarity. This is a country stretched between 41 and 51 degrees north, right up against the northern limit for viable viticulture. But Canada has something that changes everything: water. Lakes that warm slowly, cool slowly, and hold heat late into autumn. Lakes that protect vines from winter kill, delay bud burst, extend ripening, soften diurnal swings, or, in the case of British Columbia, failed to soften them enough, leaving vineyards to negotiate a harsher continental edge. Canada works because producers have learned to borrow just enough warmth from water and just enough resilience from the wines. Let's begin in Ontario because that's where most of the country's vines are, and where ice wine, the category that made Canada famous, reaches its purest expression. Ontario is cold, continental, and humid. Without the Great Lakes, vinifera wouldn't survive here. The vineyards cluster around Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, each lake shaping climate differently. In the Niagara Peninsula, which accounts for over 80% of Ontario's plantings, the key relationship is between Lake Ontario and the Niagara Escarpment, that long limestone bluff running across the region. The lake delays budburst, protects against frost, keeps autumn warm. The escarpment funnels air in winter and summer, circulating warmth and cooling breezes in a way that stretches the growing season. When the textbook explains that temperatures inland would simply be too cold without these influences, you understand how fragile this viticulture is. Niagara splits into two broad zones: Niagara Escarpment and Niagara on the Lake. Across the peninsula, you feel two distinct energies. The escarpment gives you tension and precision, while Niagara on the Lake gives you warmth and ripeness. One shapes wines that are fine edged and linear, the other broadens them, deepens the fruit, and softens structure. The warmth continues as you move southwest into Lake Erie North Shore, Ontario's warmest appellation. Lake Erie is shallower. It warms quickly in spring and cools quickly in autumn. That shorter moderation window means winter freeze is a real threat. But during the growing season, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and Cabernet Sauvignon ripen reliably. The wines are fruit forward, supple, and often less structured than Niagara. In Prince Edward County, the story flips. This is a limestone plateau surrounded by water, but its northern exposure and shallow soils make it Ontario's coldest appellation. Winter protection, bearing vines or covering them with geotextiles, is not optional, it's survival. Ripening is barely achieved in some vintages, but when it works, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir come out with piercing acidity and an almost saline, stony character. It's a marginal environment, which is exactly why the wines have such definition. And then there is ice wine, Canada's global signature. The regulations are strict. Grapes must freeze naturally on the vine at -8 degrees centigrade or below. No cryo extraction permitted, no sugar additions, only Vidal or vinifera allowed. The yields are tiny, sometimes only 10% of a still wine harvest, and the risk is enormous. Animals, wind, rot, and uneven freezing can wipe out a vintage. But when the temperatures drop and the fruit is picked, what remains is intensely sweet, high acid juice that ferments slowly to around 9 to 11% alcohol with 200 to 250 grams per liter residual sugar. Vidal gives tropical generosity. Riesling gives lift, tension, and the highest aging potential. These wines are expensive to make, expensive to sell, and yet represent a small fraction of volume, but more than half of Canada's export value. The country's entire fine wine identity still leans on this one extraordinary category. Now shift across the country 4,000 kilometers west into British Columbia, where the climate tightens and stretches differently. Here, vineyards sit at 48 to 51 degrees north, often further north than Ontario, and the climate is an extreme continental one. The Pacific moderates only a tiny pocket of coastal vineyards. The real concentration is inland, locked behind mountain ranges that create a dramatic rain shadow. The heart of British Columbian wine is the Okanagan Valley, a long, narrow corridor of vineyards running north to south along a chain of deep lakes. This valley is a study in contrasts. The northern end is genuinely cool climate, the southern end borders on semi desert, with summer temperatures that can reach 40 degrees centigrade even though the nights stay cool. Rainfall is only 300 to 400 millimeters, and irrigation is essential. The soils shift from glacial loams to sandier profiles in the south, adding another layer of variation. What unites the valley is its diurnal range. Even in the hottest pockets, Okanagan nights are cold. This preserves acidity and aromatic definition while allowing full ripeness, a combination that defines the region's reds and whites. Merlot leads plantings, producing fuller, riper wines than in Ontario, with higher alcohol and tannin. Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon ripen more consistently here. Pinot Noir shows a different face, more fruit driven, often more tannic, though capable of elegance in the coolest subregions. Among whites, Pinot Gris dominates in volume, followed by Chardonnay, Riesling, and Gewürztraminer, all of which carry the valley's hallmark balance of ripe fruit and high acidity. Just west of the southern Okanagan sits the Similkameen Valley, one of the most striking places in Canadian viticulture. High mountains on either side funnel wind through the valley, winds so constant that some vineyards don't need antifungal sprays. The climate is hot in the day, cold at night, and entirely dependent on altitude rather than lakes for moderation. The wines, especially from Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Pinot Noir, often feel a touch more powerful than their Okanagan equivalents. And out on the Pacific coast, in Vancouver Island, the Gulf Islands, and the Fraser Valley, a completely different climate emerges. Cool, maritime, damp, moderated by ocean currents, and far less reliable for ripening. Here, early ripening Pinot Noir leads and fungal disease pressure is real. These wines sit stylistically closer to coastal Oregon or northern Europe than to anything inland. Across both provinces, VQA law threads structure through the industry. A wine labeled VQA must be made entirely from grapes grown in that province, must pass tasting and lab tests, must meet must weight requirements and chaptalization limits, and must use 100% vinifera or approved hybrids. Varietal labeling follows the familiar 85% rule. Multivarietal blends must declare 95% of the combined listed grapes. These laws matter because Canada's domestic market is controlled by provincial liquor boards, some of the largest alcohol buyers in the world. And VQA gives consumers a quality signal in a system dominated by monopolies and limited interprovincial shipping. Most wine is still sold within the province where it's made. Most wineries depend heavily on tourism and direct sales. But behind the business, there is a larger truth. Canada is still defining itself. It was known first for hybrids, then for ice wine. Today, it's building a new identity around cool climate Chardonnay, Riesling, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Franc, and the structured red blends of the Okanagan. It is a young industry, technologically advanced, constantly adapting, bearing wines in winter, irrigating deserts in summer, navigating the risks of frost, drought, rot, and climate uncertainty. And that's a story I hope you carry into your studies. Canada isn't just cold, it's intentional. Every vineyard is a negotiation with nature. Every wine is the result of strategy. If you can see the lakes, the escarpments, the mountains, the frost lines, and the irrigation pipes when you think of Canadian wine, the D3 chapter will stop feeling like a footnote and start feeling like a living system. I hope you enjoyed listening. As always, you'll find the full written companion link to this podcast, and I'll see you in the next deep cut.